Welcome back to another Wolfpack Performance Talk. Know your F1-ish. I'm your host, Jay, so thanks for joining us today. And we're going to get into something that you probably heard more often than not in Bahrain testing 2023 from Sam Collins. He was walking up and down pit lane, garage to garage, going over different team cars, and he kept saying two terms: push rod and pull rod. What do these terms mean? Where are they on their car? Let's talk about it so you can know your F1-ish. Let's go. Pull rod or push rod is pretty much as the name suggests. A pull rod is going to pull down to the rocker, whereas a push rod will push up to the rocker. As you can see right here in these diagrams, the system can easily be identified by the angle of the rod as seen in the image. Pull down set up as a strut from the outer end of the upper wishbones that runs diagonally to the lower edge of the chassis and pulls a rocker to operate the spring dampener system, whereas a push rod is the opposite. The strut runs from the lower wishbones to the upper edge of the chassis, and that's how they can be identified if you see them on Formula One cars. So who's the one that brought this technology, all these developments to the Formula One car and or the pit? Pull rods were first brought to the Formula One by Gordon Moret in the 70s. Teams in today's Formula One utilize which system works best for them and their designs. Versus earlier times, the pull rod was more dominant. Each of the systems affect the geometry and the center of gravity of the car. They both have their pros and their cons. Okay, so now that we got a little bit of history and or what you can decide and how you can recognize a pull or push rod system, let's talk about some basic operations of these components and how they enact their forces on each other to work as a whole. Let's get into basic operations. So in this diagram, the parts can be identified by color. Black is your push rod, yellow is your rocker, dark yellow is the rocker splinted to the torsion bar, light gray is your torsion bar, red is your dampener, blue is anti-roll bar linkages. Now let's talk through some of the process. So the torsion bar passes through the center of the rockers. The rocker pivots on the torsion bar. The push rod pushes the rocker and twists the torsion bar to provide the spring in the suspension. So now that we went over a little bit of history, who brought this system to Formula One, and how you can identify which system you're looking at, the push rod or the pull rod, let's go into a little bit about which one is better and why would you choose it. So in terms of control on the wheels, both of these systems, the push or the pull, are pretty much matched. But when it comes to aerodynamics and center of gravity, that's where things start to separate. Teams tend to change their options based on the current regulations, era, or the design of the chassis. For instance, we're going to use the example of Red Bull Racing and the RB chassis. The RB06 was running a pull rod system courtesy of Adrian Newey, also heavily credited for the Red Bull and Williams racing success in both ground effect eras, then and now. But Adrian Newey has also been involved in the development of the RB19. The difference is the RB06 ran a pull rod system, while the RB19 is sporting a push rod system in the rear of the car. So here you can see Adrian Newey both involved in the development of these cars, these different revisions of the RB. And in the rear suspension, as one, he used a pull rod, and in the next, he used a push rod. This is what I mean by what you choose will be heavily dependent on the direction of the chassis and what's going to work best for your team and performance. Now, I bet you're wondering, do you have to match these systems? You don't necessarily have to use a push rod system in the front and then go and use a push rod system in the rear. You can unmatch depending on what the chassis needs and what's going to work better for your design. For this example, we're going to use the W14 new Mercedes F1 car. Let's get into it. So right here, you can quickly see that the W14 is running a push rod system up front, but in the rear, it's actually running a pull rod system. This all depends on what's going to work better for that chassis, and they are still trying to figure that out, and hopefully they do. So we have more competitive cars running up top, so we don't know who's going to win race to race every weekend. So listen, we went a little bit about history. We talked about how you can identify these parts. We talked about the basic operations of how these parts act on each other, and why or you would not choose one push rod or pull rod system or the other, and the fact that you don't have to utilize both systems, front and rear. You can mix and match. So I hope you enjoyed another episode of Know Your F1-ish from Wolfpack Performance and the Performance Talk podcast. I'm your host, Jay. So next time you hear all that techie talk going around the paddock or the pit, you'll be a little bit more keen and a little bit more close to know what they're talking about. Peace. Thanks for watching another episode of Wolfpack Performance. Don't forget to check out some of my other content on Formula One and motorsports topics. Like, share, subscribe, and we go live on the weekends. See you soon.